Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I was just trying to arrange the technical elements over here unsuccessfully. We'll get to it. Oh, going to start out this morning with a koan that I have talked about before, probably several times. It's a very simple koan, and it's a very important koan. And in fact, I'm going to read it this morning from the Book of Trinity, but it also appears in the Muman Khan, which in part suggests its importance. And it's a different translation here. So in this translation is case 47, I'm sorry, Chow Chow's cypress tree. A monk asked Chow Chow, "What's the living meaning of Chan Buddhism?" Chow Chow said, "The cypress tree in the yard." Now you may bear that in the Muman Khan, it's a little bit different, and I believe it says, the monk asked Chow Chow, "What is the meaning of Bodhidharma coming from the West, or of the patriarch coming from the West?" And it's in that version, it's an oak tree, not a cypress tree. All of which is completely immaterial, although it's kind of curious to me that, that the Chinese words for oak and cypress so similar that different translators could come up with different things. I don't, but it does seem a little odd to me, and yet completely irrelevant to the koan. So now I'm using that to introduce the talk today. Anytime I'm talking about something dealing with eco-dharma, eco-spirituality, it's a wonderful koan to introduce the subject. And so some of you know, well, you probably all know that weeks ago I took a trip to New York City. And it's the first time we've left Maine since the pandemic began. And it's a trip that had been in my mind for a while for several reasons. First of all, that's my home where I grew up as a child. And lived until I was about 16 and moved to college. And I haven't been back there in over 20 years. So I probably kind of wanted to get back there. But even more so, it's taken on deeper meaning for me of late in part because with Elizabeth does genealogy, and with her help, I've been learning a lot about my ancestors, and I wanted to kind of connect with my roots, which at least the immediate generations were in New York City, my birth mother, my grandfather, my parents, and so on. And because I've been working on this book and that I've mentioned from time to time, and part of the book is with my early experiences connecting with wildness while I lived in the city as a child. And so I wanted to return to some of those places that were central in my life, in my experience of wildness, for sort of two purposes. One is just like really fresh in my imagination because I've been writing about it, and wanted to kind of see if it was possible on some level to re-experience some of what I had experienced those many years ago. And secondly, one of my theses in the book is that people can make a deep and intimate connection with wild, even if they live in cities. And of course, it's like, well, you're in Maine, that's easy for you to say. Well, yeah. So I figured I would go to New York, see if it was still possible to do that in the same way that I had done as a child. So the first places that we visited when I was there as a young child, there are extensive marshes, both salt and freshwater marshes, and there were woods. and I would be able to go into those areas with my dog, and we'd see pheasants and like that, things that, when you tell people like that, that's what I experienced living in New York. Usually very surprised. And there's a bay, and the bay has its sort of own kind of wildness. So it was this kind of terribly polluted place at the end of Long Island Sound. And so I went back to see what was there. And of course, some of it was traditional. Some of it I knew. The places, those marshes I just talked about, those beautiful, 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 extensive wetlands, completely eradicated. And there literally are 30-story high-rise on that property. And the area where the woods were is a major shopping center and more high-rises. Trace there of what I had experienced as a child has been obliterated. And of course, that's true in much of urban America. That wildness has been under siege. But then to sort of continue the journey, and again, see, it's like, is there a way that people can connect? We went and visited a couple of parks, and we visited a cemetery, large, very well-known cemetery. But the park I want to talk about today, one particular park, it was quite close. It was only about a mile from where I grew up, but it was kind of like when I was, a long bicycle trip. I didn't go over that way very often as a kid. But it turns out this park has about 600 acres to it. And even though it's bisected major highway, the Cross Island Parkway, it is completely amazing. So it has 150 acres of marshlands, both freshwater and saltwater. And I really wanted to see, because those would be closest to the places where I went. But unfortunately, then there's an environmental center there, and that was closed, and there were a gate closed, and I couldn't get to that side of the park. So I went in on the other side. And what we discovered, it was just absolutely beyond my imagination, beyond my, we went into a forest. It was dense and it was beautiful, and it had huge trees and vines climbing into the canopy. It almost looked like a rainforest. And some of this forest was old growth. We barely have any old growth here in Maine. In fact, I think Aroostook County has the only old growth left, and maybe a couple of little patches here and there, and yet here we are in New York City, walking amidst old growth forest. Enormous, beautiful trees. And a thick, rich understory, all kinds of life, and wisteria that were blooming that just kind of knocked us over with their scent. And we explored further. We went to an area of this same park. We kind of, and there's a place where there was a 130-foot tall tulip tree. And this tulip tree is estimated to be between 350 and 450 years old. And it is the oldest living being in New York City. And it is tucked away in a place that's so secluded, virtually nobody, unless you come deliberately and have to talk to the rangers and get the eco tour, you're not even going to know that it's there. And it's pretty deliberate. They really don't, in a way, they want people to know about the tree, and then, they don't. But there it is, this being that was, they believe that George Washington walked past a tree. There's some historical record in that direction. And so my answer to my question, so there's also, it's crazier and crazier. This park has foxes, muskrat, and deer. It has this population of deer living right in the city, which, I had never had any idea about. And I suspect there may also be the coy wolves there. There's the coy wolves they now have done the genetic analysis, and they're a hybrid of a wolf, a domestic dog, and an eastern coyote. They're doing very successful at populating such wildernesses as Central Park and Greenwood Cemetery, and they're able to somehow manage the right within the urban core. And the other thing that happened, it was 90 degrees that day that we were there, and New York City, when it's 90 degrees, is just 90 degrees here in Maine is 90 degrees there is oppressive, because you have so much concrete and asphalt that kind of stores the heat and then reflects it back. And when we stepped off into this green space, into this park, into the shade of these enormous trees, the temperature dropped at least 10 degrees. It was a completely different climate there. Just having the earth and the plants instead of the concrete and the asphalt. So, without going any further, my question was answered. My question was answered. It was certainly in my mind possible to make deep, intimate connections with nature, even in this one of the largest urban areas in the country, in the world, maybe. And this is so important. This is so important. 80% of the people in this country live in cities, or, as defined by populations of 50,000 or more. There's another large chunk that live in the next most populous category. And only a very small percentage of America live in beautiful rural spaces. So one of the real challenges of making ecological connection, and of ultimately perhaps saving this planet, is creating ways that people in these urban areas can reconnect, can find wildness. And so to the koan, see, Chow Chow knew this. Chow Chow knew this. Where is his oak tree or cypress tree or whatever kind of tree it was? It's in the garden. He didn't go out into the wilderness to find a tree. It was right there in the monastery garden. He was sitting and talking with the monk, and he looked over, and there's that tree right there. And Chow Chow understood that it's possible to be intimate with that tree, and with that tree as an expression of the entire world, the natural world, the entire world. That tree not as an isolated being, but as an expression of all being. And so the Dharma knew the answer to this question, my question all along. Wherever there's life, we can connect with it with intimacy. We can take down the barriers that our ego creates. We can take down the barriers complex analytical thought processes can take, and connect directly with the reality of being, and in this of wildness. Just takes a little effort on our part. But the rewards are so enormous. I mean, here we're surrounded by this beauty and this life, and most people other than us were seeking refuge in air-conditioned malls and, in the basements of their homes or other places where it was cool. And we had this gift of coolness from the trees and the grass and the earth. So, other than the fact that I also had some deli and ate some of the world's best pizza, that was my trip to New York. It's like, this is my book, this is my, the end of summer book report thing or something. So what I want to close with, or not, I want, one of the things that I have started to do is develop a set of eco-dharma precepts. And and they're very crude at this point. They're just in the early stages, but I'd like to read them to you. And if after I do that, any of you are so moved to be commenters on them, I will gladly send you a copy for you to reflect upon and give some feedback. So, but this is the technological part that I was struggling with. Let me see if I can. Oh, I don't want to do that. Can I in my Zoom while I'm recording? Okay, that's not a good plan. Oh, I made you all little. You're all little tiny people now. Okay. Okay, I don't you, but I have these precepts up, and then I'll bring you guys up when I finish with the precepts. Okay, so the 16 eco-dharma precepts. Being one with Mother Earth. Being one with all beings. Being one with the waters. I vow to be awake to my actions and their consequences. I vow to be awake to the life of the planet. I vow to be awake to the lives of all beings. I vow to take up the way of taking only what I need. I vow to take up the way of protecting all life. I vowed to take up the way of speaking the truth about climate change and mass extinction. I vow to take up the way of being responsible for my actions. I vow to take up the way of generosity and sharing. I vow to take up the way of cultivating compassion for all beings. I vow to take up the way of not wasting. I vow to take up the way of taking action to protect Mother Earth and all beings. I vow to take up the way of being mindful in all my relationships. I vow to take up the way of being peaceful and gentle with all beings that I encounter. As I said, that's just a kind of first early pass. Needs a lot of work, but I'd appreciate any feedback. If people want to take some time with that, I will send you a copy. Okay, so there. Any thoughts or comments or? Okay. Doug is leaving us for the woods. What a man.
Well, Peter, I would say you said that they're crude. They're in a crude form. They seem very well thought out and well articulated, even in their crude form. So I'd love to have a copy and look over them. I don't know how much insight I can give you because I think they're at a really good place. But I don't know. I just wanted to offer that.
Oh, well, thank you for saying. That one of the complexities of this is that, in fact, if we understand the usual 16 precepts of our way, they all encompass this. This isn't anything that isn't sort of contained in the original 16 precepts. It's just make certain aspects more explicit, in this concept of relating to the earth. And so I think, and some of them have done better with that, and some not. Kind of wanting to both maintain a distinction and maintain the integrity of the original precepts.
So I'm really getting an image that this is like a new strain of Buddhism that is really earth oriented. It's interesting. Huh? That's all I have to say.
Well, I think, well, no, Gary, it raised something interesting. When Todd spoke at the retreat on Friday night, one of the points that he made was that there's sort of no correct single way, no single correct response in Buddhism. He didn't say it that way, but the way I'm saying it that way, that, we all sort of, what Buddhism does is gives us the existential responsibility to figure out how we're going to and express the Dharma. And so this is, I think, eco-Dharma is one of the infinite ways. For me, I have an affinity for it because I have affinity for wildness and important to me personally. But beyond that, as I see it, climate and all the things related to it are becoming so emergent that it needs to get sort of like lifted up to maybe a more prominent place, and there's many things that we can do with our Dharma. But my hope is that this would be sort of on everyone's agenda, which is, which I want to be clear, that's not up to me, and I'm not saying, nor is it, the ways that can be done and are infinite. So it can be planting a garden. It can be taking a walk in the woods. It can be standing sign protesting a pipeline. I mean, it's kind of, it can be all the kinds of personal things we can do to reduce our carbon footprints. And it may be all of the above, but I think it's given to each person to figure out how their heart tells them that they want to express this aspect of the Dharma. And God, we have no right way. This is not like in some religions, there's a right way. We don't have a right way. But, the only wrong way is to not be awake, is to not pay attention, is to not respond when we see suffering or destruction. So some of us are gonna participate in this eco Dharma exploration this month that I sent out a little notice on, and we have a nice little group. We have at least 2 people from this little sangha, plus a couple of people, plus a couple of people from elsewhere on the planet. One woman contacted me from California and asked if she could our group. So we're not going to be a big group, but I think it's going to be, and I don't even know what that means. Exploration. It probably means this. I don't know. So I'm waiting. You know, we're gonna be guided at this group, the One Earth Sangha, that specifically targets this aspect of our practice, and they have teachers that are going to this. So I think, and further, I think it's also like, I think we're all sort of learning what it means and what it is, and you know, this is absolutely not in any concrete. In Britain, the Eco-Dharma folks are very big in the Extinction Rebellion over there. A lot of the folks that when they were demonstrating, getting locked up in Trafalgar Square and so on, were Buddhists and were expressing themselves by sitting silently and just letting the police drag them off, kind of. But again, there's a million ways.
I just had this weird thought that I feel like sharing. Maybe it's probably prominent in eco-dharma already, but I just it's like the technology and everything that we live in as humans, the buildings and everything is like it's built up over time by our species, and it sort of reminds me of that, like how our egos are built up over time by our life experiences and how we respond to them. And it's like all the cities and everything else are almost in a way sort of the same thing, built up over time by our experiences and how we respond to them more as a species. And so eco dharma would be sort of escaping from that kind of ego-like structure into the whole of life, you know, not escaping from it, but, you know, shifting focus away from this ego-like thing. So I just thought I'd mention that weird thought.
Yeah, no, I think that's a full explanation. I really like it. You know, I think that in some ways our homes be the outer manifestations of our egos, right? And you know, it's very interesting. In New York, the house that I grew up in was built by my parents in the 30s, and they were both school teachers, and but because of that, they had their jobs in the 30s, and they were able to afford to build the little house that they spent a few $1,000s on at that time. And then over the decades, they kept improving it and adding on a little bit and blah blah blah. So it was really a beautiful little home, a little cape. And so my sister and brother-in-law have been living there. The sister inherited the house, and they've been living there until last year. And they decided that as they're aging, that was too much for them. So they were going to move into a condo up in Westchester or something. So they sold the house. So one of the things that we went to is like to see what's happening to this house. Well, what they've done, they've taken it down completely because nobody wants to live in a nice little cape. And they're building the entire, what was a lot on and trees and all that is gone. And it's all the house. It's like a 5,000 square foot house. And in this part of Queens there's like this pseudo Mediterranean style. So that you've got this sort of like brick colossus with a tile roof and wrought iron. That's the kind of the hallmarks of this style. It's absolutely hideous. I mean, you know, and you know, but that again, that's somebody, that's going to be the outer manifestation of his ego. Nobody needs to live in a house like that unless they've got 16 children, or you know. So yeah, we're building out structures of our minds, literally.
I feel that way
And
about
you can't keep it up.
in the suburbs. I feel that way about these lawns too, and I myself fall into the trap living in South Portland, which is very suburban, and I find myself worrying about my lawn and how green it is compared to the neighbor, or not really. And you know, I often think, what would it be like if I just didn't mow the grass or didn't weed whack or didn't, you know, put all this shit into it, and just let it go. But then I feel like my ego would crumble because of what I would be thinking the neighbors would be thinking. It's just keeping up with the Jones crap.
You know, back in the 70s, through some work I was doing, I had a connection with somebody at the EPA Washington. And at those times, the EPA was actually the Environmental Protection Agency, whatever Donald Trump turned it into. But one, you know, at the time, she was focused on at that lawns as one of the biggest environmental disasters that we have. You know, in a sense, they are deserts. They you know, they aren't places. You know, if you have a little, even if you have a meadow grass, it's full of birds and snakes and on and on and on and on. If you have a mowed lawn, it's like a desert, right? And then we not only have a desert, but then we add chemicals. You know, I don't know, I was looking at the other day and there was this big ad for Roundup. I think, who's putting effing Roundup? It's been proven to cause leukemia and we're putting it on our lawn still. Hello, you know, and so, you know, lawns are insane, but you know, and those are, there is a sort of that micro level. We have some power to change some things, or at least, you know, but they throw you out of South Portland. And, you know, I've seen instances where people have done that and they've just let their lawn grow wild. And, you know, literally, you know, the city commissioners come and serve them with papers because the neighbors complain loudly that you know, that it isn't a well-mowed lawn. And I guess a lot of cities and towns must have some kind of code that allows for that. Although, you know, I'd love to see somebody take it to court for that. And you know, you should be able to have a wildflower meadow. Okay, maybe I have a, you know.
Well, we certainly couldn't have that, but at least the town council has you can't use pesticides, you can't use Roundup, and you can't. All the lawn care places are really upset at South Portland because they can't kill the, you know, the moles or any, you know, no pesticides or anything like that. So that's good, but it's still a lot of deserts around here.
Yeah. So the fundamental thing that has to change is not lawns, or not small houses or big houses. It's people, right? And our egos, and not, you know, not expecting the world to conform to us, but us conforming to the world. Okay, getting on in time here. So Robert, I will send you that copy of that. See, I just killed a mosquito. Ali Lama says it's okay. So
Okay, we are preparing. Are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it.
So, parting words here. You know, when I was only physically at the retreat for a very short time, but a man there who was from another lineage, and he was so austere. His facial expression never changed the whole time. And in fact, even when I was auditioned for the service, and I had my full robes on, the whole regalia, but I also had a straw hat that Elizabeth had bought for me in Little Havana, a white straw, kind of an old Cuban man hat. So I wore that into the Zendo with all my robes and everything. This guy never cracked a smile. His face didn't change at all. So I love it. I can laugh. It's so good. That makes me feel good. So wonderful.